Joel Evan. I promised
Let's
myself
go.
that I would not butcher your name.
Like I butchered your name on our podcast.
You got an easy one. You got an easy one. You almost got two first names. Is
So the interesting,
Evan the
yeah.
last
So
name,
the
or what's
interest,
the story?
yeah. So the interesting thing about my two first names that you very adroitly noticed, and good on you because other people have noticed that too. And so Joel Evan is actually not my name. Joel Evan is my middle name. My real last name is Aylworth. Like you, I have the curse of a name that no one can pronounce or say. It's a Welsh name. And so it's spelled Aylworth. No one can spell it. No one can pronounce it. It's been the story of my life. And when I was creating my coaching business, I'm like, this is going to be a train wreck. I don't know how people are going to find me because they won't. They're not going to go to joelelworth.com. They won't find me. So my brother said, why don't you just use your middle name? I'm like, that is genius. And so that's what I did. Ironically, though, still to this day, people mess up my name and they call me Joel Evans. They add an S because they feel like you said, they're like, but Evan is not a last name. They tell me Evans
Yeah.
is. So anyways, still a curse.
I just started going with my first name. That's it.
Oh, that's an
Whenever I
interesting
just
idea.
sign in or whatever it is, I just sign Oleg. That's it. The last name, it just why put people through two very difficult journeys? Just give them one. First name's already hard enough. So, but I was thinking about it's like Joel Evan. That's interesting. Usually it's plural, Joel Evans. It's like there's got to be a story behind that.
You got
And there
me.
it is.
You got me.
Hey, I'm glad we're able to do this. I'm glad we're able to do a back to back here on our podcast marathon that we're doing right now. But I wanted to connect with you because I had reached out to you asking you to contribute to one of the books. We won't reveal the person's name as it is still coming their way. But I reached out to you asking you to contribute to one of the books. You did. I wanted to learn what was it like to be able to express your thoughts for that person, to put those thoughts down on paper, and maybe even more importantly, what was it like to do it from one male to another?
Oh, that's a great question. So for me, let me answer the last question first, which was from one male to another. It
Mm-hmm.
was very simple and very easy. Why? Because I'm 41 years old, and I think I've just done a lot of work on myself in terms of growth and life coaching, and just going through putting myself through the ringer in a sense of asking myself why I believe certain things and why I act the way I do, and who am I right now? I have two kids too. So I had a marriage that was failing for many, many years and wasn't doing well. And so I was always asking myself, why, where do I need to grow? What do I need to learn? And that has, I think, propelled me to a place where from one male to another, I didn't even think of that. When you sent me that, it didn't even occur to me like, oh, this is a guy I'm speaking about. Because for me, it was easy. I just dropped into my heart and I'm like, man, this is what I feel right now about this person. When I think of this person in my mind, the image that I think about, and that's how I expressed myself in written form, which was to me very simple. Like, this person has affected and impacted my life in a really positive way, and in a short amount of time too, actually.
Yeah.
And I felt connected to this person, so that was easy. So that part was very easy. um
Do you
Go ahead.
express things like this? Do you express things like that, like gratitude? Because then I know you and I connected multiple times around this, and a lot of the work that you do, especially with men. And I was just curious because my experience has taught me is that the concept of vulnerability is oftentimes perceived as a sign of weakness. It's something that I think many of us don't choose to do. And I would even argue that many people don't choose to do. It's not only men, but it just happens to be so that there are a lot of male figures that don't express that or get connected to that component of who they are. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, having worked in the space for however many years by now, what makes it challenging? What makes it challenging for other guys to express their thoughts, their feelings, their love for other beings on this planet?
It's easy. We're scared.
Hmm.
We're scared, man. I'm scared to be seen. I'm scared you're going to find out who I am. I'm scared you're going to find out that I'm really a nobody. I'm scared that you might think I'm unworthy. I'm scared that I may not be good enough for you. I can speak to that because that's who I am. And I fight that demon every day. I fight that. I don't even look at it as a demon anymore. I just look at it as like, oh, that's a pattern. That's how I show up, you know? And again, my background, briefly, I'll give you my background. I was a police officer for almost 15 years in some of the most dangerous cities on the West Coast, Oakland and San Francisco. So I also grew up in a household I was a third generation police officer. So I didn't have a bad childhood. I grew up in a middle class family, but we didn't talk about emotions. Okay.
Huh.
We didn't like, and I thought that was normal. So when emotions come up, I just shut down. My mom also wasn't an emotional person. She wasn't, even to this day, she's not. She's gotten way better, but she's not like a super emotional person. So I didn't have any type of understanding of what even emotions are as a childhood. Then I entered a career that actually made it okay and actually amplified and doubled down on my detachment. Because here's the thing, when you go into a shooting scene or any type of chaos, you better not get emotionally involved because your life might be on the line. You might die. So actually, it's an amazing strategy and an amazing survival skill to be able to detach emotionally because you might die. So now I've got a childhood wound and I've got a job that's conditioned me over and over again that it's not okay to feel shit. So these are great skills in the battlefield. They're not great in the marriage, and they're not great with your family or your fatherhood. And I have 2 young boys, 9 and 6. And so it's no wonder that I ran into all these problems. And that is why, my friend. And that's, I think, a lot of guys, even if they're not going through they didn't live the life that I lived. I'm sure many guys listening to this can relate. They're nodding their head going, oh yeah, I know exactly what this guy is talking about, because it wasn't okay to express those emotions, man. And really quick, I want to just touch on this point of vulnerability, right?
Mm-hmm.
Vulnerability is, I don't think guys really even understand what that is. And I think they're doing it probably the wrong way. And they're being vulnerable. Maybe because, and they start, I don't know what they're doing. Maybe they're crying obsessively and they think that's the definition of being vulnerable. Like, oh, if I start like, shedding my emotions and, being vulnerable by like, yeah, tearing up or things like that. Or even, I think, what I mean is I see a lot of guys in this men's workspace is they're just communicating their vulnerability incorrectly through some of these modes, because they probably think like, oh, this is what my wife wants. This is what I think she says and she needs. Be more emotional, Joel. My wife used to say that all the time. Be more emotional. You're so dead, she would say. I'm talking to you and you're freaking dead. Like, are you there? Like, are you a human being? Do you feel anything? And I think a lot of guys relate with this. I want to tell you something that happened just last week, because I work in this space and I'm constantly, again, fighting old conditioning patterns in myself. And the other week, my wife and I were just in a funk, man. We were just in a funk. And we had a little check-in, and I was super quote unquote vulnerable. And this is what I mean by vulnerability. This is what they really want. I was like, hey, listen, I have been showing up this last week, not the highest version of who I am. And I'm going to tell you why. And I started explaining to her my brain pattern and what I do, because this is what it shows up for Joel. 6-year-old Joel gets hurt often by his wife, her snide comments, her dirty looks, her coldness, maybe lack of affection or touch, which happens. And that triggers 6-year-old Joel. And so I go into a state of fear, anxiety, and then later it manifests into this escalating emotion of anger or covert anger, where I kind of pretend like I'm not angry, but I actually am. And so I explained this to my wife, and I'm like, I need help with this. And I'm not blaming you. I'm not judging you. I'm not criticizing you. But damn, I stand for so much more in this freaking marriage, and I love you, and I want to be unified together, the team that I know we are when we're rocking. And I know these are my struggles. I know this is what I'm doing to show up, not my best, not the fullest. So, and I said, here's why. Because again, when 6-year-old Joel got his feelings hurt, that 6-year-old comes out as 41-year-old Joel. And so I explained all this to her, and I just said, this is who I am, man. I laid it all out. I'm like, this is who I freaking am. And sometimes I'm scared and I pretend like I'm not. It's bullshit. And she just said to me, just literally last night, Oleg, she goes, I got to tell you, like, I didn't tell you this, but like you expressing that was so like freaking attractive. I freaking love when you do that. Please do that more. And it also gives me insight on who you really are and man, how I can serve you as a wife to the fullest. That, my friend, is vulnerability. And I didn't even know that. I just was like, I want to fix this problem and I know what I need to do. And I don't want to. It's scary to express myself, but I know the answer. And that's what I did.
Mm. Well, also, I think so much of what you and I even discussed about prior to getting onto this podcast, on your podcast, is opportunities for feedback, right? Hearing that from other people and understanding, oh, okay, this is what it means, because what I've learned is that the concept of vulnerability and whatever else, it may mean one thing in my mind, but how it is processed and experienced for other people is probably drastically different. And it is until I create a space for the other person to tell me, hey, I really appreciate you doing this, or I really loved when you did X, Y, and Z, then I can start to recognize that, oh, this is what it means. It's not about this. It's more about this, and it's more about that. And I'm actually curious when it comes to the feedback and when it comes to your experience as a police officer, because it's how my assumption is that the feedback was a critical component of that job, right? The ability to work and receive feedback in that field. I mean, I feel like that to some degree, that's all there is, because so much of it is just situational reactions and how do you kind of contain your own space. How was feedback taught to you then in that profession?
Well, that's a loaded question because my brain goes in many different spaces with that. And I'm going to tell you why.
Sure.
So here's just the general feedback and the persona of a police officer is, again, it's not okay. It's not okay to feel these feelings or being scared. I'll tell you another story that'll kind of, I think, bring this to life. I was in an officer involved shooting within my first year and a half out. Okay. There was a police chase at 3 a.m. was my Friday. I was supposed to get off in a couple hours. And I had no business pulling over cars that early in the morning with my partner, but we were go-getter rookies and we wanted to save the world. And so even though we only had like a half hour left in our shift, we were like, we're going to pull over a guy who could be a bad guy and might be doing something no good. Well, he was. We didn't know this, but so we pulled this car over because it was swerving all over the place. We pull the car over and he pulls over, but then he quickly takes off. So I'm driving. It's a car chase now, going like 60 to 70 miles per hour down an area. It's 3 a.m, luckily, but we're going down an avenue in a suburban kind of commercial area. So luckily there's no cars on the road, but he's going extremely fast. He loses control of the vehicle, kind of spins out. I catch up to it and park behind it. Now, at this point, the driver is doing something with the vehicle. It looks like he's trying to start it, but he can't. So I kind of wait in the car for a second. My partner gets out and challenges the suspect with his firearm and gives him commands to give up. Now, the suspect has one of three things he can do. He can give up, he can comply, or he can fight. And he chose to not run away, which he had plenty of space to do so. He chose not to comply. And instead, he did something I've never seen, really very unorthodox. He jumped out of the car, reached into his waistband, and started heading towards my direction on the driver's side, which was very odd. Most people don't do that. Like I said, they will either fight right away with the police, they will comply, or they will run, but they'll run the opposite direction. So he was running towards me. My partner deemed that as a threat, and he shot this person multiple times. So that I ended up getting out of the car. By the time I got out and what I could see, I could clearly see the suspect's hands. My partner could not. And when suspects reach into their waistband, it's a typical indicative sign of reaching for a weapon. My partner
Sure.
felt that was happening, given the totality of what was happening. I did not, because I had a different angle than him, and I could actually see the suspect's hands, both of them, very clearly. Long story short, the suspect dies. We later find out that he had robbed someone that night and murdered them. And it was a robbery that had went bad. And so that's why he was running. He thought that we knew. He was also hopped on a myriad of drugs. And so he probably wasn't thinking too
Mhm.
clearly. We had no idea what this suspect had done. We had no idea. We were just pulling over a guy who was driving erratically. Now, the therapy that I got after this, okay, the therapy that I got was I had to meet with a shrink at least once. And that was per the department. This was like their triage for anybody that goes through a shooting. You go talk to a shrink. And so I talked to him, and it was fine. It was a good conversation. First time I ever talked to a shrink ever. And we met for, I don't know, half hour, an hour. And that was it. He goes, all right, well, great. Like, seems like you're doing pretty good. Have a great life. I'm 25 years old, by the way. And
Yeah.
I leave that situation and go on I go on my merry way. But I'll tell you this, Oleg, I suffered for about 6 months. I had some nightmares here and there, but not too frequent. So I didn't really pay much attention to it, just occasionally. And then those all went away. But for about 6 months, I was back on the force working, and my hand would shake uncontrollably as I would interview suspects or people that were detained or going to scenes. And I never told anybody this because I was scared that they would find out I was weak, that I couldn't cut it. The department that I worked in was like,
Mm.
toughen up, kid. Like, that was kind of the attitude. Like, we've all been in shootings too. So, like, what's the big deal? So do you think I was going to go to those guys and tell them my hands are shaking uncontrollably? I can't figure it out. I don't know what's going on. Even on times when I'm like, I don't feel scared, but like my hand is, I could not write. Like, I couldn't write your name. I would then try to prove myself by going and stopping people, bad guys. And I'd be like, I'm going to go stop all 3 of those guys by myself just to freaking prove to my brain that I can do this again. And I would do that. And then I'd get out, I'd ask them for their name, and my hand would be shaking so uncontrollably. I could not actually get their names and write and read it. And then I would just pretend like I got their names. I'd be like, all right, you guys are good. Like, have a nice day. Because I couldn't even get their names to like read what it was. And I'm like, and then I would even look at my hand. I'd be like, do they know that I'm shaking uncontrollably? And I'm like, I couldn't even see if my
Yeah.
hand was moving. So I'm like, what's happening to me? So again, did I feel safe to like express myself or, be that person? No, that was the feedback that I had gotten from I think the cultural standpoint. Now, things have changed overall in police work. There has been a more drive towards mental health, and people are starting to recognize some of the things that we go through, and they're starting to deliver
Yeah.
a lot more attention to this holistic approach so that things like this don't always happen.
Well, it's an interesting role to serve in society or today's day and age, right? I think for me, having seen and heard all these different experiences and stories of people, and I try to look at every side as there are always 2 sides or multiple sides to any given story. But I think being in the role that you're in, it seemed very interesting because of the pressure, the societal narrative, the perfect image, so to speak, that gets created around you when really the reality of the matter is you're still people, right? Experiencing the same exact things that we're experiencing, the emotions, the stress, the depression, the this, the that. And that's where I was actually curious in even asking you that question at the beginning, what it was like to be able to express the thoughts that you did, because how much of it did you have to rewrite? How much of it did you have to unlearn as far as, hey, this is how I was brought up into my world. These are the things that I learned. And then it seems like there's a whole other journey that you had to embark on yourself through your work, through everything that you're doing right now to really try and understand, oh, this is what love feels like, or this is what it feels like to say I love you to someone else. This is what it feels like to say thank you. This is what it feels like to see someone else experience this and then all of a sudden feel tears on my own face. So that's where I was curious. It's like that you've lived a very different experience than a lot of other people, and having to unlearn that probably has been quite the process.
Yeah, and I'm learning it every freaking day. Really, it's a practice. I mean, because here's the thing: like, it's not just me. I have my own, baggage. Again, I have my own, you know, uh,
Yes.
issues from police work and other stuff. But a lot of us are dealing with the same exact components that I'm dealing with, and we learn about
Mm,
this, and most of us, if we're lucky enough, we learn about this. We learn about this idea of the ego, and that the ego is just there to protect us. It's just one part of us, and that's not who we really are. Like, that's just a piece of us that is designed to protect us and keep us alive. But there's another part of, and that ego prevents me till this day, because it's what is hardwired in me, and that prevents me from being silly, being humorous with my kids, connecting in a deeper way, like you're mentioning, connecting deeper with my wife, being vulnerable enough to tell her that, like, I'm struggling in these areas, and I'm weak in these areas, because I will never want to admit that. And I've never done that, because that would mean I'm weak. And I can't admit that, man.
yeah.
And so I've always designed mechanisms, protective mechanisms, to shield me, an armor, if you will, to put on me to protect myself from actually feeling anything. And I've learned over time that that's not correct. And actually, it's okay to feel emotions. It's okay to be sad.
Yeah.
And I never learned that. What I actually learned, and again, this can be detrimental, because at 18 years old, I was lost and confused and didn't know what I was going to do with my life. And all my friends were going to Stanford, Cal Berkeley, UCLA, amazing schools. I was going nowhere. I didn't know where I wanted to go. I was told to get good grades in high school and middle school and coming up, and that's what I did. And then all of a sudden, that ended. And at 18, you had to make a decision: are you going to college? You're going to go to the military? What are you going to do? And I hadn't given it much thought. I just was like, I don't know. I was just go to school and get good grades. That's what I was told to do. And now it's over. So I don't. Now what's the next step? And I don't know what I want to be in the world. My friends like, oh, I want to be a doctor. I want to be do this. So they knew they had to go to these schools. I didn't. I didn't know what my purpose was at that time. And so I was lost, and I started reading books like Tony Robbins and getting influenced by that. And Tony Robbins is an amazing human being. He's an amazing soul. But one of the things that I took from him is this idea of conditioning yourself to always be in a high vibrational state, optimism
Hmm.
and that kind of stuff. And believe me, that is very valuable. And it's created who I am today, because now I've like got this state of just kind of energy and optimism. And that's real. But it also masked a lot of who I was, I realize now. It also masked the sadness, because I told myself in my brain, it's not okay to be sad. It never is. So how do you think I can be a good dad when my kids are sad? And I'm like, what's your problem? Stop being sad. Like, just be happy like dad all the time. That's fake. That's not real. And so having to actually now
Yeah.
recognize that, oh my God, you know why I get triggered? Because 6-year-old Joel got hurt again, and he's sad. He's freaking sad, man. And maybe he's scared that he doesn't know what the next step is going to be and what he needs to do. Being able to feel that, but then also recognizing it's just a feeling, and these feelings and emotions are transient. And then I can pivot from there. But so often, I think many of us, like I said, we don't even want to feel it. We won't even allow it. And that is a huge problem. And there's a difference between allowing to feel it and then pivoting versus just, nope, I don't want to hear it. I don't even see these feelings. That's a different feel. That's a different
Yeah.
reaction, if you will.
Does having kids help with that? Does having kids help with the ability to feel, to get closer to feelings? Because I feel like I'm not a dad just yet, but I've been around enough kids where I could see all the different emotions and how they express it, and very honest and transparent. And I always wondered, how does that impact the parent? Does being a parent in those situations, does it help you get connected more to your own emotions?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you why, because I remember when I had my first kid, um, it was really one of the, it actually after having my first kid, that's when I went on a journey to get a life coaching certification. Yes, I wanted to better myself, but it was really one of the first times in my life where I was like, I really care less about me. And I want to figure out a way of how I can give back more to the world. And that, I think, was somewhat actually inspired by my kids, my first child, because there was an ego drop there. Now we all have like I said, the ego is, in me still, but to achieve and to do things and to be successful. But there was a definite drop in the ego where I just was like, I don't really care so much about Joel, and all the things I need to accomplish in life. And I was like, man, how can I give back? It's not about me anymore. It's about him. So I think just that component alone. The second thing I would say is once I had kids, everybody that didn't have a kid, I'm like, you're an asshole. I don't know, like, and I'll tell you why. And it's a funny thing, just a funny statement for me to say. And it is supposed to be funny. But all my friends that were like still single or going out, I'm like, dude, you have no idea. You have no idea like what it's like to take care of another human and how selfish you are. How selfish I was just maybe a month prior to having a kid. I didn't realize like the amount of work it was going to take to care for another human being. And it just reminded me how like selfish a lot of us are. And so having kids can really, again, bring that into light. And then the last piece I would say, and I think you know this, but because kids are so freaking genuine and they are so honest and they're just so in the moment and present, that they can express like really the truest like emotions and feelings. And because they have the best probably access to presence than any of us, because they're not distorted yet, they're not jaded, they're not on phones yet. And because of that, they know how to live and be in the moment. And so if you're paying attention, yes, they can give you a great insight to presence and just what really I think matters in life. Because we talked about this. One day we're all going to be dead. We're all just going to be, we came and we died. And I don't want to say that's morbid. And if you know me, like I have a positive outlook on life. Hopefully you can see like I'm very positive. But the reality is no one's going to be remembering me for if I had tons of money and I used to measure myself like I'm the provider for my family. Like my kids go to a good school and they eat organic. That's great, Dad. But my son at my eulogy, he's not going to be talking about, man, I'm just so grateful that my dad put me through freaking private school and bought me organic food. He's not going to say that. He's going to talk about the moments we freaking shared together. He's going to be talking about the times that dad saw me and connected with me. And one of the greatest moments I had with my son, my oldest, and I'm kind of I'm sorry, I'm just rambling here because there's just so much good stuff to share with you on that question. One of the greatest moments I had with my son was up in the last year. My 9-year-old, we went on a father-son like camping trip, and it was kind of like a men's retreat for the men's, but also for a chance for the boys and the dads to bond. And we learned like valuable hunting skills and how to camouflage yourself, how to build a fort out of twigs and dirt, out of basically nothing, Oleg, and survive. Yeah, the final test on the 5th day was you had to build it and sleep in it overnight. And so if it rained, and it did rain a little bit that day, like you had to make sure that this thing was weatherproof and was going to freaking work. And the temperatures get cold. I mean, it wasn't super cold, but in the 30s or 40s. So temperatures drop at night. So you better make sure that you can survive, right? And that, my friend, was one of the greatest trips I've ever been on with my son, because no phones were allowed. It was just him and I. And there were just so many glimpses that I noticed his smile, or just like the way he looked at me, that I never noticed before, because I wasn't paying attention, because I was too busy. Even if I was being a good dad and taking him places to parks and playing, I was distracted about other things. I had nothing to be distracted with that week. It was just him and I and being in the moment. And there's so much value there. So yes, kids are a gateway to, I think, presence and feelings.
I've had this as you were sharing this, I was taken back to this conversation or a dream or a vision, something that still might or might not happen, but it's a conversation a friend of mine had. And one day we were just talking about this thing about being dropped off somewhere, just in the woods of wherever, somewhere in the United States or a foreign country, and literally having to figure out how do you survive over a course of 5 days or a week. And there's something about that experience that really stood out to me because I think developing the skills to become interdependent, it's huge. I think the other component of all of that is the bond that you create with another human being when you face adversity is nothing comparable to any other bond you might be able to experience. So I'm wondering or curious, even in your case, because I'm sure you guys had your own fair share of adversity during a time like that, where you were able to really see each other through a completely different perspective, which possibly creates greater appreciation for that person that you have in the days moving forward, right? Like, what do you do when the fort doesn't work out according to the plan? What do you do when you don't have that additional rope that you need to put it all together? What do you do when it rains? What do you do when when the kid just starts expressing who they really are? Well, those are all opportunities to connect and to learn and to engage. And I'm curious, going through that experience and then coming back, what type of appreciation or image did you develop for your kid after having an experience like that?
Yeah, that's a great one. Um, I think the big thing that I kind of it was so this was again 5 days, just him and I, and we had an 8 hour drive to get there and an 8 hour drive to come back home, and so you know the things that I walk away with is just that, man, like he's actually really fun. He's actually a really fun kid. He's actually a great kid to travel with too, and I never like recognize that as much and appreciate that. He's Mr. Adventurer, and he was so easy. My other son's the opposite. So, and I noticed that now. Like it was so easy to drive 8 hours with him because he's just down for anything. And although
Mm.
I would have loved more help from him building the fort because he does get sidetracked and he just wanted to have fun, um, I could have definitely used more help in that area. What I also just really loved is that we had to the final day you have the option of bringing a sleeping bag, and so otherwise you sleep on the dirt, and you were allowed to have one blanket, but the guy running the program said, listen, you have one blanket, you only get one blanket, but I will let you also bring like one sleeping bag if you need like that. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna bring the sleeping bag because I'm just worried that I don't want him to get too cold that night, and then like I don't think he would die, but just be so uncomfortable he wouldn't be able to sleep. And he told me
Sure.
before we go to bed, I go, hey bud, do you want the sleeping? I'm gonna put the sleeping bag down. He's like, no, I don't want it. And I'm like, why? What if you get too cold? He's like, he goes, no, I wanna come back home and tell my brother and mom that I slept on the dirt. I want to let them know that I did this. And so I'd never seen that part of him, Oleg, because there's many times I see him not be tough, not show up and be tough when I think he should be a little bit more resilient and not give up so easily. And
Uh-huh.
that was really a nice moment where I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. I didn't want to do that. I was like, man, I'm scared for you, man. And he's like, no, I can't wait. When I get home, I'm going to tell them that I slept on the dirt. So yeah, I think those are some of the key moments. And just, again, there's this incredible bond, like you said, that you just have this deeper love and connection for each other. And I think he felt the same of me because it was really a time, I don't want to say the first time, but just a time where he could really connect with me on a deeper level because I'm
Sure.
just so much in my head with everything I'm doing and so busy with all the projects that I'm doing. It was really, I mean, I can't, every person, every dad should go out and do this with their kid. It's like, it's a no brainer to me.
Yeah. Well, speaking of connecting with your inner child, your kids, how can people connect with you? What do you have going on? What can people be a part of?
Yeah, thanks for highlighting that. So right now I have a huge, huge mission. You got a little glimpse into, and I didn't even know what you're going to ask me today, but I guess it works out
Yeah.
serendipitously because I have a huge mission in the sense that you guys, if you're listening, you just heard how my marriage for 11 years, and I'd say 10 of those years it was very rocky and tumultuous. My kids, I made a lot of mistakes not being able to be present, not balancing work life balance, not being able to juggle those two. And I paid the price dearly. I have an amazing relationship with my wife and kids right now, but it wasn't always that way. My kids would spit at me, kick me, yell at me, and I couldn't figure it out, man. I here I am, this guy driven to succeed and success oriented, wanting to constantly learn and grow, and I couldn't figure out why this was happening to me. And so I went deep over the last couple of years, hiring multiple coaches, parenting coaches, dad coaches, wanting to figure out and get this right. And I
Mm,
think I did. I think I got it right. Not only is my marriage working amazingly, of course it has its ups and downs, but I'm so happy and just grateful to be in it now. And I wasn't that way. Probably
mhm,
had one foot in, one foot out many times. I don't feel that way now. And I think a lot of guys, a lot of men feel that way. And I'm on a mission to help those, especially the first responder men, me having been a first responder. And I just launched First Responder Fathers, which is a men's work program. And it's a 3-month program
mhm,
to really help men build unshakable marriages and build deeper connection with their kids. And I know it's freaking possible because not only have I done it, but I've helped others. And fathers matter. We do. And if we're not modeling for our kids, number one, right now, but if we're not modeling how to treat our spouses, how will our kids learn how to treat their spouses? And how will the next generation,
they
the next
won't.
generation, the next generation go on to treat their spouses? And that's what it's all about, man. And the last thing I'll say on that is, and it chokes me up every time I think about this, but at a deeper level, and I never thought about this till recently, there's a lot of men, co-workers that I work with who I know who committed suicide. And it's high in the first responder police community and the firefighter community. It's very high. And I see the two guys that I can think of that I knew personally, they committed suicide over relationships. Their wife was having an
Mm,
affair, blew his brains out. Another guy I know had an argument with a girlfriend, blew his brains out. That all now there's obviously a lot of things going on there, but my point of this is that that was caused because there was friction in the relationship. When men can understand, and I had to learn this the hard way, when they can understand that the relationship actually can be what heals both of you, man, you will go all in.
mhm.
And I really truly believe that. And I see that. And so I just think, wow, imagine the impact we can have, not only for the legacy of your family and the next one for generations to come, but with suicide, mental health. I mean, it's really, we have a chance to really do some great work here.